everybody, this is Brooke, aka Supernatural Simmer 34, and today we are back at it with another speed build. Now, to preface this video, I'm going to say that I'm trying to make my videos a little longer, so this ended up being around 17 minutes, and yesterday's video ended up being around 8. Let me know if that's a positive change, because longer videos means more work, and there's not much of a point to doing longer videos if you guys don't enjoy them. But for this speed build, I tried to get into the Christmas spirit, so I built a house for a family that really loves Christmas, although I did use some of the cards with the dreidels on them, so I think one of the parents is Jewish. But just as I did with yesterday's video, I'm going to talk about things other than the build, because talking about the build is boring. Good background noise, but if you're trying to be entertained, listening to someone talk about the build is not the way to go. So today I'm going to be telling more stories about elementary school, particularly 3rd grade. Now in 3rd grade I had this teacher, we'll call him Mr. Alexander, but I had him for a teacher. Mr. Alexander is a great teacher, and he's actually the teacher that got me into writing. There have been so many times where I've wanted to go back to my elementary school and talk to him, but at the same time I'm pretty sure he doesn't remember me. So the first story about Mr. Alexander that I remember is one day we were reading Charlotte's Web. He calls us to the mat or whatever so he can read to us, but my back starts hurting, so I stay in my chair. You might wonder why he let me stay in my chair, but he let me because I'm a good student. He wasn't concerned that I was going to slack off. So he's reading, I'm trying to follow along, but that back pain felt like period cramps. Like really, really bad period cramps. Keep in mind that I was in 3rd grade, so I had never felt anything like that before. But it starts hurting enough where I'm crying, so I walk over to the opposite end of the classroom where there are these plush pillows on the ground. I lay down and start sobbing, but like really quietly. Y'all are probably wondering, Brooke, why didn't you go to Mr. Alexander and tell him that your back hurts? And to that I say that little Brooke thought that would be disrupting the classroom, and little Brooke is anything but disruptive. But I lay there, and eventually Mr. Alexander heard me. He stopped reading, and he must have not comprehended the fact that I was crying, because he asked me to come sit with the rest of the class. I continue laying there, bawling my eyes out. Y'all, I will freely tell you that that is the worst pain I have ever felt. I haven't felt much bad pain, but that was the worst. My asthma attacks were better than whatever the fudge was happening with my back. So he sees that I'm crying, and I think he asked someone to escort me to the office. I don't remember who it was. It was probably some popular girl who thought that by allowing me to lean on her for the 2-minute walks, it somehow makes up for the fact that she's a stuck-up jerk. Anyway, I go to the office and I call my mom. She picks up, and she's in the middle of her shift at work. I can hear the loud noises in the background, people shouting orders and such, and she asks in the most irritated voice, "What?" And I don't want you to hate my mother after I tell this story. My mom is a really, really good mom, but back then she was constantly at the end of her rope, so she couldn't be as delicate with us sometimes. But I explain what's happening, and she's like, "I'm at work. I can't pick you up. Can you please just make it through the rest of the day?" And I said no, because there was no way in the world I was going to be able to do that. So she sighs and says that she'll have my granny pick me up just this once. She says it had better not happen again, as though I asked for debilitating back pain, and I get picked up and I go home. But I found out something about that day recently. My sister told me that Mr. Alexander went to her classroom and asked if I saw a chiropractor. If you don't know what that is, it's a person who massages and cracks your back so that you don't die from spinal issues. My least favorite thing about all of human evolution is that we started standing too quickly for our spines to adapt, so now we're just walking around with these super weak backs that are very prone to having issues. Anyway, Mr. Alexander asking that explains why we did start seeing a chiropractor soon after, though. Now, if you'll remember in the last video, I said I am a huge crybaby. This was true in 3rd grade, and it is still true now. But in 3rd grade, we were doing private reading time. Now, Mr. Alexander had this rocking chair, and the first person to the rocking chair gets to sit in it during silent reading time. I never really cared, because why would I want to sit in a rocking chair when there are perfectly nice pillows to lie on? But one day, the person in the rocking chair got out of it. Now, I don't know if your household had this rule when you were a child, but in my house, we had a little thing called move your feet, lose your seat. And I decided that day that I wanted to sit in that seat. So I did. I sat down and I enjoyed it for maybe 10 minutes before the kid comes back and tells me to move. I say move your feet, lose your seat because I'm a bratty 8-year-old, so the kid goes to tell on me, and I didn't really think that Mr. Alexander was going to take the other kid's side because, again, move your feet, lose your seat. But he took the kid's side and tells me that I have to move in the softest tone of voice possible because I was his favorite student. More on that later. But he tells me to move in a voice that says there is no way in the world I'll get in trouble for this. And I start crying. Again, I am bawling my eyes out because I'm so scared that I'm going to get in trouble. So Mr. Alexander spends like the next 10 minutes trying to calm me down, and then silent reading time ends just as I finally calm down enough to move. The other kid looks furious, but I calm down and I go about my day. I do not remember who that kid was in any way whatsoever, but I imagine they hated me for at least the rest of this school day because object permanence is not great in third graders. Now, I mentioned that I was Mr. Alexander's favorite student. Well, one day on the last day of third grade, this fourth grader approaches me. And I'm nervous because I'm a third grader. That's a year ahead of me. They're 9 and I'm 8. I am lower on the food chain. I was scared, but they whisper in my ear, "Did you know that every year Mr. Alexander chooses one little blonde girl to be his favorite student?" Now, at the time, I was super happy because as one of the only blonde girls in the class, that was pretty much confirmation that I was his favorite student. But now I look back and I'm like, that is just about the creepiest thing I have ever heard. Like, every year. Okay, so he's done this multiple times. Mr. Alexander chooses his favorite student. Okay, that's normal. Teachers have favorites, and so do your parents, if you haven't realized it yet. But teachers have favorite students. She's always a little girl. Okay, slightly creepy. Why is it always a girl? Is it because he wants to encourage a girl to go for smarts instead of looks? Is it because he wants a daughter? Maybe he became a teacher to help little girls find their passion in literature? Who knows? It's only slightly worrying that it's always a girl, especially considering he is definitely heterosexual. For those of you wondering, he had a wife and she got pregnant at the end of the year, so we know he's into her like that. But then, she's always blonde? Like, what? Why is she always blonde? I don't want to remember Mr. Alexander as Mr. Potential Pedo, but that is really, really weird to me. The only explanation I can come up with is that he wanted to discourage the dumb blonde stereotype? I don't know, but I find that creepy. But also, I don't even know if this is true. Some fourth grader just walked up to me and told me this. It could be completely false, but it worries me a little because we've already caught Jared Fogle II in my middle school. So what about Mr. Alexander? But I don't think he's actually creepy because he never so much as touched me during that entire school year, at least from what I remember, so I choose to believe that one of my favorite teachers is not a complete creep. But more stories. I'm about to shoot a bunch of rapid fire stories at you because they're all really short. So we'll start with the time that I learned you don't actually sing poems. Up until third grade, I'd always thought that a poem and a song were basically the same thing, but you called it a poem if it rhymed. So naturally, I thought you sang them. But one day, Mr. Alexander was looking for someone to read the poem aloud to the class. My scrawny little arm shot up into the air. Now, do you know Hermione Granger? And how it was always described that she was practically jumping out of her seat to raise her hand? That was third grade me. But he chose me and he moved so I could sit in the rocking chair. I sat down and I sang the poem. I do not remember what the poem was or who it was by, but it was probably something by Shel Silverstein. When I finished, Mr. Alexander said, "Good job, Brooke. Interesting choice in singing the poem." Interesting choice? Interesting choice. What does that mean? How am I supposed to interpret that other than you are the epitome of an idiot? Like, God, that still keeps me up at night. But another story, in third grade we learned cursive. You remember when that was still a thing at schools? They thought we would need it in our everyday life. Yeah, they sure couldn't predict the future. But I was pretty good at cursive. In fact, the majority of my handwriting is still kind of looped together. But we had just finished the alphabet, so I decided that I was going to write my essay in cursive. It was 6 pages, double-spaced, with my enormous little kid handwriting. So maybe 300 words, and my hand was aching. I'll get back to you on that. But I turned it in, and Mr. Adams was like, "What the fudge, Brooke? This is a science essay." But that's the end of that story. He was weirded out. Now, we'll move on to my hand hurting. I didn't really realize this until Mr. Alexander pointed it out, but normal people's handwriting doesn't imprint on the next couple pages of their notebook. Like, there were indents in my paper. I could breathe on it, and it would fall apart because I pressed so hard. But he came to me about this, and he was like, "Brooke, are you okay? You seem very angry based on the Grand Canyons in your essay." And I told him that, no, I'm happy as a clam. So then he asked if my hands hurt, and I said, yeah, they do. And I wondered why he asked that. Didn't everyone's hand hurt after writing? And he explained that no, your hand should not hurt when you write. I still haven't been able to fix this. If I write anything longer than a list, you will be able to read what I wrote on the next page. But the final story isn't really much of a story, but more of a weird tip that Mr. Alexander gave me. He approaches me when I'm tying my shoe, and he asks if I'm left-handed. I say, yes, I am. He asks if I struggle with tying my shoes tight enough. I say, yes, I do. What does that have to do with me being left-handed, though? I never got an answer to that. But he sits down in front of me and unties his shoe, which honestly, I'm looking back and that was really weird. Mr. Alexander never wore shoes with ties on, like shoelaces on them. He always wore loafers. Anyway, he unties his shoe and then begins tying it again. But you know the first step where you have to twist the shoelaces together? That was the part I always struggled with. I could never get it tight enough. But he told me that after you twist them, put one of the shoelaces under your shoe while you do the bunny ears. And when it's time for the bunny to go around the tree or to tie the bow or to sacrifice something to Satan, I don't know, I never learned it like that. But when that time comes, you take the shoelace out from under the shoe and finish what you're doing. I still use that trick, by the way, just thought I'd share it. So about the next story, I'm not entirely sure what year it happened in, but I'm pretty sure it was 3rd grade because Mr. Alexander's classroom was right next to the bathrooms. As in, I could go to the bathroom and still hear Mr. Alexander's lesson. So I did that a lot. I never really realized that that counts as skipping class, but I suppose it technically does. I would go to the bathroom a lot, and Mr. Alexander would let me almost every time I asked. You can get away with a lot when you're a good kid, by the way. Try it out. But I was in the bathroom and I would spend my time reading the writing on the walls because people would write little stories and things about who likes who, so I would read those. Another thing I did that you might find a little odd was that, okay, so whenever the janitors would paint over the writing, there would be nothing to read. But I had this little thing called an imagination, so I would try to see, like, faces in the paint because it didn't really go on evenly. Anyway, one day I'm in the bathroom and there's no writing, but I also can't see any faces, so instead I decide to waste a lot of toilet paper. So they have the toilet paper in one of those cases, like the plastic things where you can't really access a lot of it, but the one I could access, I pulled all of the toilet paper off the roll. And I did this for about 2 days, so maybe I did it 3-ish times. But then there was an announcement about it. So I was sitting in class during this announcement, paying attention, but then the loudspeaker comes on, and our principal starts talking. Quick little interjection that I found funny. In 4th grade, we had principal and principal on our spelling test. It's one of those words where 2 different spellings have the same pronunciation, and the way that they taught us to differentiate between them cracks me up even today. We remembered how to spell principal, like the headmistress or whatever, by associating it with the word pal. Principal. They wanted us to think of the principal as a friend. Anyway, the principal comes on the loudspeaker and she starts talking. She's a really nice lady, by the way. I've ran into her in a corn maze a couple times since I left school. Well, elementary school. But she comes on and she says, "Will the person who is wasting toilet paper in the 4th grade bathroom stop doing so?" Now, the 4th grade bathroom is the bathroom right by Mr. Alexander's classroom, so I knew it was me. And I got so scared. I was terrified. What if they made me sit out during recess? Or I have to eat lunch in the office, which, by the way, is still an upgrade from the peanut-free table. The lady at the front desk is a really nice person. But the biggest thing that scared me was the idea of getting detention. Now, I didn't know that detention isn't a thing for elementary schoolers, but I was so scared, so I stopped, and no one ever knew it was me. Now, the next story also happened in 3rd grade, just as all of these have. Very busy year, right? Anyway, we were learning multiplication tables. Now, I guess I am a smart kid, so I had never studied a day in my life at that point. I didn't study spelling words, that reading street, bull poop, anything. It all came easily. But multiplication tables didn't, and that infuriated me. Okay, the zeros, ones, and twos came easily enough. I passed those tests on the first try. Now, if you don't remember what those tests are like, I'll remind you. The teacher passed out the papers face down and then prepared a stopwatch. Then they set it off. We had 3 minutes to answer 50 multiplication questions, and if we didn't answer all of them, we couldn't move on to the next level next week. And little Brooke had to be the best, so I tried my hardest. But this other girl, her name was Yasmin, I think, actually got to division a couple weeks before I got to the tens. But it was the last week for the multiplication tables, and I was on 0 through 12. I had 3 minutes to answer all 50 questions. And I tried so hard, y'all, but I missed it by 1 question. I didn't get it wrong. No, I got all of them right. I just didn't have the time to answer it. So, remember how I'm a crybaby? I started crying, like choking on my sobs kind of crying. I was so upset with myself for not being fast enough to get that last question, and Mr. Alexander let me retake it, and I am still so grateful for that. You have no idea. I'm still so happy that I completed my times tables because I did. The second time I took it, I got all of the questions. But those are all the 3rd grade stories I have for y'all, except for one last little story about Mr. Alexander. I was in 5th grade, and I was in the school to pick up my sister from something. I forget what. It doesn't matter. But I was in the school, and I was walking around reminiscing, because that is my elementary school. But then I see Mr. Alexander, and I wave hi, and he's like, "Brooke," all shocked and stuff, and we get to talking. It's that kind of shallow conversation you have with those relatives that held you once as a baby, where they ask about school and stuff. But then he mentions an essay I wrote. He quotes an essay I wrote. An essay I wrote on Charlotte's Web. Y'all, I know exactly what that essay was about. I remember everything about it. It was about why E.B. White used the word bright to describe Wilbur, which, by the way, is the dumbest essay prompt in the world. But he quotes it. And I'm still so surprised because by this point, I have been out of his class for 2 years. But we haven't seen each other since. So we are coming up on the end of the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below, and I will see you all tomorrow.